I love it. I love it. Um, I think a related question to that sometimes comes up on the podcast is related to like this search for wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
Like as you talked about, there's many different paths and there's so many different things, but it does seem like there's maybe something that really grabs a hold of someone in the way of just this deep curiosity and wonder around something, and it starts this particular search that often lasts a lifetime, and that comes up is a common thread with many guests that we've had on. Sometimes it's silent meditation, sometimes it's this, sometimes it's that. But how do you make sense of maybe our call or desire to seek wisdom and follow some particular path?
Yeah, well, it's incredibly human. That maybe if you think of what do all humans have in common, like this, in fact, I could quote Aristotle and say um, that we all have the desire to understand or desire to know. Or I mean, wisdom is like one word, like for the for what it is that we're seeking. So we all like have that in us, especially like when we're 4-year-olds. If you've ever been around or raised to tell, they're full of why. And there is, I think it's just because we are, we have all this kind of excess mental capacity in a way, because the way our, like, for a matter of evolution, our brains develop, we don't have to be always thinking. We have more than enough processing power, you might say, to take care of basic survival things, and we have stuff left over, and we can think about, like, what is it all about? Like, what is the meaning of life? And I guess in my own experience of this, and maybe I don't know how typical this would be, I never would have thought what I was engaged in was the pursuit of wisdom in that way, because that almost sounds like you're looking for someone to tell you answers, or you have some view about what the thing is you want to be wise. I just had questions, and it was just so interesting. So I was engaged in certain kinds of pursuits that, like, are what you do if you're kind of looking for wisdom. And then I found some philosophers, I guess, like Aristotle, who thinks, and Plato thinks about these things. And maybe now that I'm older and I've raised a family and I've had a career and I had to do things like, figure out like how to run a department, how to manage colleagues, and how to deal with bureaucracy, and how to figure out how to balance your checkbook and deal with the insurance company and all of those things. Like, then I could sort of, now I think maybe I'm closer to having like some wisdom in the sense of thinking about what's important in life, and also where I am and how I kind of fit into that. And I'm always learning new things, like either about how the world, or that's why, I realized recently that I spent some time in departmental administration. We all have to be, can chair a department, and you have to kind of, I figured that leadership is like about two things, right? You want to kind of inspire people to do things, right? Have goals, and then you also have to manage them. And when you manage people, you have to get them to do things, right? And that's some people are really good. That's the people who get good evaluations, and being good at their management jobs. They're good at getting people to do things. I could never get my kids to do things, or get my colleagues to do things, or that. But I thought I was pretty good on like organizing tasks and keeping. I could run something, but the idea of leadership is actually something very different. So I found something about what I'm good at. That's a certain kind of self-knowledge. And it's a wisdom that would fall under, I think, self-knowledge. I think self-knowledge is a very, maybe not underappreciated, but certainly very important component of what we might think of as wisdom.
Yeah. It's so interesting how many different little paths, whether you think of this search or the seeking, yourself, life, the world, others. I mean, there's so many little different things in the way of this search for greater understanding of things. And I'm excited to do a little bit of that to transition into the book. I've got a few terms here that maybe we could talk about to get us started. One is probably a really easy one for you is, who is Aristotle for anyone that is, obviously people have probably heard the name, but if you could paint the picture of maybe the where, when, and why he's a perennial figure.
Yeah, so Aristotle was a Greek philosopher in ancient Greece, so active in the 4th century BCE. So he was a student of Plato. So if you think of like the most famous Greek philosophers, you might think of there's Socrates, whose pupil was Plato, and then there's Aristotle, who is a pupil of Plato. So Aristotle comes to Athens. Your audience may have heard of Alexander the Great. There have been some recent movies for the history buffs about him. So Aristotle grew up in the kingdom of Macedon, so contemporary Macedonia. And his father was court physician to the court of King Philip, father of Alexander the Great. So he was, part of the sort of the high society in Macedonia. But he came to Athens as a 17-year-old. So he sent from Macedonia to Athens, where Athens was where Plato's Academy was, and so he enrolled in Plato's Academy the way we send our children when they're 17 and 18-year-olds who enroll in the University of whatever. But Aristotle stayed there for not the rest of his life, for at least another 20 years or so. So there were no diplomas. You didn't have to leave. It was a research center. So he was a member of Plato's Academy. He became a philosopher in his own right. And then after Plato died, Aristotle left Athens for a while, but he came back and then he founded his own school, the Lyceum. So all of our own vocabulary, like we talk about the academy, like this is higher education. That's Plato's Academy was the name of the original institution of higher education in this tradition. And a Lyceum, often in French you talk about lycée, so it's like a college or high school. That comes from the Lyceum. So Aristotle founded his school, the Lyceum. And he stayed in Athens until just before he died, which was the year just after Alexander, his pupil, because Aristotle had actually been a tutor to Alexander at some point in his career. Alexander the Great, who had conquered most of the Greek world. There was a lot of anti-Macedonian sentiment in Athens just after Alexander died. And Aristotle was a resident alien, his status was a meta. He wasn't Athenian. He was politically vulnerable. He left and he retreated to lived on an island. And he died there within the year. I think he died at the age of 62, around 322 BCE.
I have a curiosity question. Any sort of idea when you think of him at 17, heading to Plato's Academy, any sort of info on how many students might have been a part of Plato's Academy? Are we talking like hundreds, thousands, any sort of idea?
No, remains, but it would be in the matter of I think there might be dozens, right?
Yeah.
Of people. It was not an institution of higher education. It isn't like the University of Georgia, right? Or University of Toronto when I was an undergrad. It was nothing like there was no formal curriculum. No, it was a very he was sort of into the sort of the household. It's like a small estate. You can still find there know where the academy was in Athens. It's not big enough for there to have been thousands of people. So it's like a circle of friends.
Nice. And another term that comes up early on in the book is this Greek term eudaimonia. How should we think about that today?
Well, I guess eudaimonia is the central term in the ethical tradition that comes out of ancient Greek. And I think the way to translate it is happiness. Right. So, but happiness, but when we translate eudaimonia as happiness, we have to be kind of very broad-minded and think, what do we think of as happiness? There's a very, terminology and words change their meanings over centuries, even within the same language. I'm very much a language nerd. So thinking about how we get a lot of our terms from Greek and Latin, and then even how Greek terms like get their like etymology kind of think about. But if you think about how even the English term happiness, if you look it up in a big historical dictionary, like the Oxford English Dictionary, which will tell you, go back centuries of how a term was used, you find that happiness was used to talk about someone, if you're happy, not you're feeling good, but rather you're doing well, right? And so in a good example of this, a related term in Greek, that Aristotle uses interchangeably with eudaimonia, or at least with the adjective, is makarios. So, and that's how, if you might describe, if you're a pagan Greek of Aristotle's era, and you want to talk about the gods, you could say they are makarioi. So that's to say they are blessed, right? So we use the term kind of blessed. It has a really theological context, but that's, but if you think of in the New Testament, if you think of the Beatitudes, right, in the Gospel. So, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. That's translated from Greek, and the Greek, which is several centuries later than Aristotle, is blessed translates makarios, and makarios means the same thing as eudaimonia in lots of contexts. So what you have is, when you say blessed are the meek, you're not saying they feel really good, right? You're saying that they are, benefits come to them. It's not just that they get this reward, but this is saying this is, the best kind of life. This is an amazingly good life, like inheriting the earth. Like then you have to, that's how, a life in which you are meek and then the world is yours, and you have to figure out what that means. But that's that's an endorsement of what counts in life. So eudaimonia is the central term in Greek ethics, and Aristotle actually was probably the philosopher who made that the central question. The people who get to define the questions for other people to answer, they're influential, even if their answers are not the ones that we would accept. So it was Aristotle the one who said, like, the question is, what is his whole ethical treatise, in fact, the one that I've excerpted in this book, How to Flourish, is all trying to answer the question, what is happiness? And he's really asking, how should we live? Right? And so how can we be eudaimons? If you want to live a blessed life in a certain idiom, or if you want to live a happy life, and you think if you're a parent, what do you wish for your children to have? Happiness, a good life, like that's what eudaimonia involves. So it's hard to translate, but we have to translate it.
Yeah. And something that comes up in the book is this idea that happiness is for its own sake, kind of not some other end like other things. Could you talk a bit about that?
Yeah. So if it's sort of if you read Plato, you get the sense from the figure of Socrates, as usually the speaker thinks that happiness is the most important question in his life is, how can we be happy? What is it to be happy? Whereas, Aristotle wants us to ask sort of think about what is happiness. I'm sorry, I've just lost track of exactly how you phrased the question. Can you?
I was hoping you could talk a little bit about this idea of happiness being for its own sake,
right?
Different than some of these other things where it's not for some other end.
Right. So I guess where I was heading by that circuitous route is that Aristotle puts this kind of structure on what I'm not going to tell you exactly like all the details of how to live a happy life, whether you should be a dentist or whether you should be a plumber or like what you should do, none of that. But we can just think about happiness it's something, it's good. And what is it to be good? Well, to be good is to be something that's worth desiring. It's to aim for. And there are different kinds of goods. You can just say things that we value are valuable. They're valuable for their own sake. And they can also be valuable for the sake of other things. There are some things that are valuable only like for the sake of other things, like having a root canal. That's valuable for the sake of dental health and avoiding pain, but it's not like valuable for its own sake. So if you think of what is happiness in the most abstract terms possible, where there's going to be lots of variety, how you fill it in, and given your life circumstances, your historical circumstances, that it's sort of the ultimate goal in life. So you think of happiness as something that's valuable for its own sake, right? Not because it gets you something else, but rather it's so your way of thinking of it's what's ultimately worthwhile, where that ultimate, that formulation plays the same role as for its own sake. So if you're inquiring to what is happiness, and I think, how should I live my life? That's sort of maybe that Socratic way of forming the question. Where you get to Aristotle is what is ultimately worthwhile in life? Or how do you live your life? How do you conceive of a life that's governed by a commitment to what's ultimately worthwhile?